And thank you for the reminder, by the way, about the recording, because you know me, scattered brained. All right, thank you all for joining me. It's a small group today, but hopefully you'll get something good out of it. That's my general hope here. Um, Again, please keep your mics on to interact throughout part of this. I'll let you know. But remember, again, communication is 70 to 90% nonverbal communication. So it helps me to see your faces because then I know whether or not you're receiving the information I'm giving you or whether I have to explain more, which you may not want, actually. All right, current announcements. Again, I just want to remind everybody, class meetings starting May 17th to the end of the term. They will start at 8 a.m. Seattle time. I know that's painful. Again, I apologize, but I am afraid that it's just where I have to do this to make this happen. So, and midterm conferences start this week. I'm sending people out emails to verify. Do I? I think I actually am seeing both of you today. Am I not?
You're seeing me today.
Yeah. And Natalia, am I seeing you today?
Yes, at 4:30.
At 4:30, great. Okay, so just to let you know what we're going to be doing for the midterm conferences, the first thing is I'm going to let you know what I have for your standing in the class, grade wise, because I'm sure everybody's concerned about that. Although, even though I give you the weekly reviews, um, hopefully, I'll be able to give you more complete information at our conferences. And I'll let you know what you're doing really well to date, what's working for you really well. And then a few of the things that I think I'd like to see you work on. And you and I, during our conference, will come to a decision together about what are the things maybe or for the next half of the term that I would like to see you work on to bring into your academic work in this class. And you and I will make an agreement about the two or three things that I want you to focus on. And that way you'll have a little bit more direction as you move forward. Are there any questions about this? It should be mostly painless. Okay, so don't worry. It's kind of like the first conferences we had, except that now I have more information to share with you, and you have more information to share with me. Okay, and the other thing I asked during the midterms is if you are struggling in the class, one of the things we will be doing is we will be discussing how I can help you uh, meet the challenge, right? Whatever challenge you may have, and also how you can help yourself meet the challenge. So it will give us an opportunity, if you need it, to have a game plan, right, going forward. And I think that might be very helpful to folks. Is there anything else that you would like, just in general, you think would be helpful for a midterm conference for anyone? And again, use the chat if you need to, say no, yes. All right. Thank you. Okay, class journals. First of all, there's no journal this week again, and there's no journal because I have to start midterm conferences. So I've never done these conferences before. This is the first term I decided to do them because the last several terms during COVID has been so hard for people that I thought more of a personal touch would be appreciated and maybe even helpful for my students. So I'm focusing more on the conferences. But what I'm finding, and this is your instructor's problem, but this is what I do when I find there is a problem in the class, if something maybe not working. I like to bring it to my students. And of course, because you three bothered to show up, you get to have the conversation with me. So when I give these conferences, actually all this term, I have been working on my two classes, so it's just part-time, 12 hours a day for 6 days a week. It is no longer sustainable for me. And I hope you're laughing. I'm opening the door for you to laugh at this. So I'm trying to figure out how I can maintain the journals because the journals, in my opinion, are extremely helpful. In the journals, what I'm seeing most of the time, especially people who take the assignment to heart, is some really fantastic connections that we often don't get in the discussions, right? So I want to kind of maintain the journals, but they're becoming overwhelming for me personally. The amount of journals, especially because of the amount of late work in this class. So I don't want to dismiss my late work policy because too many students are struggling too seriously. And when you have that percentage of students struggling because of life responsibilities as well as anxiety because of our environments right now, uncertainty that many of us are experiencing and feeling. So I don't want to get rid of the late policy, and yet the late policy is killing me because I'm getting so much late work. And it becomes difficult to keep up. So I want to open up the floor for a few moments, and I want to hear what you think about the journals. And I also want to hear any suggestions that you may have. Are you able, for example, to read all the feedback I'm giving you? Do you find it a chore? Would there be a better approach? Because right now, and I'll just end it here and then I'm going to open it up for conversation. Because right now, what is going on in our world has just caused such chaos in the educational realm, having to do everything online, trying to make it so that it's more personable, making more connections for students and also for the information. So I need to hear what you all think because I can't just make top-down decisions. All I can do is make a lot of assumptions and possibly fundamental attribution errors about how you're doing, how you're juggling everything, and how you're handling everything. So I would like your thoughts on this. And please, for this, open up your microphones and talk to me a little bit about what you're experiencing and what your thoughts are.
Okay, so I'll go first.
All right.
I like the class journals. I think they're really nice, and I think at least for me, I could really get into it when I do some journals every week. But I'm also okay if it's too difficult for you and we stop doing that if that's what we have to do.
Are you, I don't want to stop doing it. I'm trying to save it. Do you find the amount of feedback overwhelming or just about right, or you could use more? How are you feeling in that realm?
Well, I like the feedback. I think it's enough. At least for me, I like that amount. That's pretty good for me.
It's a good amount. Okay. Anybody else? I would love to hear your thoughts.
I also agree, and I like the journals,
Okay.
and I find it a good way to reflect on what we're doing in class that week. And I think the feedback is enough. I actually like the receiving feedback, and
Okay, good.
I like how you give like how we can fix that.
Mm-hmm.
Like if there's a problem, you tell us how to fix it, and I like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So that's working for you?
Yeah.
Same here.
Same
Oops,
there?
sorry.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to keep them, but I think when I give the feedback, and we'll see how this works and how other people feel about it, because I'm probably gonna, I was hoping more people would show up today to our class meeting, but I think what I would like to do is to structure the feedback in such a way that I tell you what, instead of saying, okay, this is the term they discuss, this is how they discuss the term, and then going through each little element, I think what might be a little bit more successful is to keep the stuff that I am letting you know where things are going really well, right? To give you like 1 to 2 things that I think are going extremely well, and then 1 to 2 things in which you can work on. Would that be still enough feedback in order for you to progress individually as students? Because I keep individual records on what each of you are working on, and I go back and forth with those records to the work to see if there's a if I need to push you a little bit more or back away a little bit more, or maybe give you a new challenge. So would that function all right for you?
I think that sounds pretty good.
All right.
Yeah, me too.
You too? Okay. Natalia?
Yes.
All right. I'm going to be playing around with it just a little bit so that I can more accurately give feedback. I was also playing around with this idea of having on Mondays 2 class meetings instead of 1, in the sense that if I have one combined class meeting in the morning, that maybe I have one at a different time of the day, the same meeting, which would allow more people to attend. Would that be helpful?
I mean, I'm sure it would be helpful for people who can't make it to the first one, but
I am just trying to make it as accessible as possible for as many people as possible, which, we only have a few more weeks left. I don't want to make any major changes in the class. But I do want to consider the balance. Does that make any sense?
yeah.
Because I'm noticing that, and I'm sure it's partly because of the holiday, I'm noticing that there's a lot of missing work. So there's a larger percentage of people who are falling behind, which partly prompted the Easter egg last week. Is I thought maybe that would be a relief for folks to be able to get work in. And I'm thinking of having a second one towards the end of or in the middle between now and the end of the term. Did anybody submit anything during that Easter egg in this group? I can't remember. I'm so sorry.
I think I did.
I think
but
you did too. You did an incomplete piece, right? Which is
yeah,
great because that's what it should be used for. Well, I might play with doing, one more Easter egg, and so that more people are able to make up a little bit more work without any penalty whatsoever. And that way, I can enhance the success. Teaching in COVID is really hard. It's really hard because of the amount of stress you all are under, which is extraordinary. The amount of stress, especially young people. I mean, by the time you get my age, you're okay to be inside. It's a little bit of a different situation. So I just want to find a way to help everybody become as successful as possible. Thank you very much for your feedback. It's very helpful for me. And also during individual conferences, I'll be asking for additional feedback. So please keep in mind if there's something that you feel like isn't working for you in the class, if you can communicate that to me, it's very helpful. All my classes are constantly being redesigned to try to address the unique situations every term, because there's always something. My mom used to say that's always something. Comes from Gilda Radner. All right, class activities for this week. Here's our class. Can you all see this?
I can see it.
Awesome, thank you. So this week we're going to talk about deep listening. There is a lot of audio this week, just to let you know. There is a whopping 6 pages of text I'm asking you to read, but the video and the audio comes to about an hour and a half. Now, again, when you do my podcasts, you do not need to do the meditation at the end. But because there is not an assigned meditation this week, I'm going to encourage you to find one to do on your own because it's healthy. It's helpful for stress relief, and especially for those celebrating the holidays. We're getting towards the end and your bodies are getting super duper tired because of the fasting. So having a good meditation will be helpful to you, okay? But we're going to definitely look at this week about how we can listen better. And it's called deep listening. And it's something we don't do here in the United States very well. As I said, there is no journal this week. I have so many student conferences that it's a little overwhelming. So I'm going to delay the journals for one more week, and then we're going to pick it up in week 6 again. And of course, we have our discussions. Is anybody here who is a class leader for next week? Let me see.
That might be
Class
me.
committee. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to be sending out, yeah, a couple of you are. Okay, so I'm going to be sending out an email probably later today that talks about next week's work with cultural communication. It's going to be a little bit different than it has been in the past. So I will be sending out an early email that hopefully will give you a heads up, because we don't have a journal this week. For those of you who are going to be presenting in the week 6 discussions, it's going to be a good opportunity to get ahead on that one, because it's going to be a little bit more complicated than normal. All right, just a FYI for everybody who's going to be giving that discussion moving forward. So we basically have a lot of audio this week to listen to. We have our discussions, and of course, our conferences start this week as well. I do want folks to get ahead of the game if you are a class leader for the cultural communication in your experience, which is going to start happening next week. Okay? Any questions on this? All right. Deep listening. My question to you is, how do you listen? And I don't want to hear about the quality of your listening. I'm curious about how you listen. Think about a conversation you recently had with somebody and tell me what you think about the process of listening. What do you do? Can you analyze it at all? Natalia, can you go first? It's terrible, but I'm gonna put you on the spot.
When I listen, well, I stay quiet and I imagine what the person is saying, and I try to focus.
So you imagine, when you imagine, do you mean like you see pictures? I'm putting on socks. Sorry, guys. Do you mean that you see pictures in your head while somebody is talking, or
Yeah,
are you listening for particular pieces of information or
both, but mostly I imagine like pictures. And
pictures?
yeah,
So you're seeing the scene in your head, if so to speak. If
yeah,
somebody's describing something. Okay.
yeah.
Anyone else? By the way, that's a
Uh,
really good practice for imagination. Yes, go ahead.
so I guess when I'm listening, I do the same thing kind of. I stay quiet. I try to listen to their story and think about what they're going through. I also like to look at who I'm talking to, see their body language, how they're moving, and see what's going on with that. And tone. I think tone. I got to listen to how they're saying something. If they're mad, if they're sad, kind of got
Right.
to pick up on that.
So you're listening to paralanguage, right? That's a term from last week. Paralanguage are the tones, the sounds, the sighs that we make when we talk, which communicate a great deal. And of course, you're talking about nonverbal communication, so the expressions on the face, the body, and so on and so forth. And Nafiso, how about you? How do you listen?
I would say I kind of do the same things, but for me, I mostly work on understanding what someone is saying,
Ooh,
because oftentimes I can't, like, if they use certain terms that I don't use or slang, I won't be able to understand them. So I focus on understanding them first.
understanding them first. Okay, great. That's actually really important. All of you have some very good techniques. And deep listening requires listening to understand. Just what Nafiso just said is that listening to understand is vital. This is what we need to do. But for the most of us, we don't do this. We don't listen to understand. What do you think we do instead?
Maybe pick off some parts of the story
Exactly. We listen to respond, right? So we listen for different parts of the story that hopefully will allow us to say something, because in the United States especially, silence is uncomfortable for most of us. We're not very well used to it. So we listen to answer most of the time. And we listen to hear a cue, some kind of cue that would allow us to respond to the other person. But unfortunately, this allows us to listen to only what we wish to hear rather than what is actually being said. So, this idea of listening to body language, this idea of listening to the para language, which are the sounds that we make, if I was talking, I went, what would that communicate to you?
Maybe tired, maybe
Yeah.
didn't want to hear something.
Right, or annoyed, or it has lots of interpretations.
Yeah.
And of course, we interpret that paralanguage contextually, what's happening in the conversation, what's happening around us, who happens to be around us. But most of us miss the nonverbal communication. And one of the questions that were asked last week, and I can't remember who asked it, but there was a question that was asked about how do we communicate, say one thing, and then our body language says something different, right? So it's so important to listen to body language, because when we don't listen to the body language, we are missing more than half of the conversation. And we're going to talk a lot about individualism and collectivism next week. But I want to discuss how it impacts us here. Now, how many of you were born in the United States?
I was.
I
Okay.
was.
Yeah,
Me too.
you too. Okay, so each of you being born in the United States, even if you have different aspects of your culture, traditions, and families that might give you a collectivist kind of understanding of the group needs. But ultimately, most of us are what we call individualists. And you've heard me talk about this a lot, because our culture impacts our communication greatly. Matter of fact, our culture impacts everything: our communication, our culture, our financial structures, our political structures, our educational structures. They're all interweaved. They can't be seen as separate elements, if you will. And in individualism, we are worried about our needs, or it's me over we in general. So from the moment you were born, you were indoctrinated with certain kind of ideas. First of all, you are special. How many of you gotten that? You are so special. You weren't told that you were special by your parents? Because you're going to make me cry if that's the truth.
Yes.
Thank you. Special and unique are two terms we often raise our children with, okay? And we also see it on TV shows. We see it on almost all of our entertainment, whether it happens to be video, audio. Look at how people in the United States take to YouTube. Okay, when YouTube became a thing where people were hosting shows on it and all that, it was anybody could become famous because you're special. And if you can bring that special talent out, you got it, right? But then there's a downfall to this as well in individualism. That means all of our successes and all of our failures fall on our shoulders. And there's consequences to this, which we'll talk a lot more about next week rather than this week. But it's important to understand that from a communications point of view, because we are individualists, because we nurture things like competition, because we nurture things like individuality and thinking outside the box and competition and all of these things coming together, that impacts how we talk. And it also impacts how we listen. So because we are a low context community, meaning that we share little meaning, right? And when I say we share little meaning, I'm not saying that we don't share the same meaning about a large conceptual idea, i.e. freedom, freedom is a big idea, right? We are free to be you and me. That was a song I grew up with, free to be you and me. And it's a very much a United States kind of point of view of seeing things. And it impacts how we talk because our conversations tend to be competitive rather than nurturing or compassionate. Has anybody ever felt that way? Have you ever like had a bad day and was venting about it to a friend or a family member and had your conversation hijacked?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Natalia?
Yeah.
Okay, so this happens all the time. And we do it for a couple different reasons. Most of the time we think we're being helpful. So if I was to say, I'm sorry, I'm a little brain dead today. If I was to say, oh, I got one for you. So last week I had to help a friend who lost his job. He was in a very, 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 very bad way. So we took him out on a small camping trip just to get him away from his problems for just long enough to maybe relax and think about things. And whenever we were having a conversation around a campfire or talking about different ways in which we did things or different ways in which he might approach a new career and all of that stuff, he constantly ambushed the conversation. Like you couldn't tell a story without him saying, "Oh, no, no, my story's better," and then taking over the conversation. Now, on the one hand, that is a very typical way for Americans to communicate. And he meant nothing by it. He's a very nice man. He has a big heart. We love him. We appreciate him. And I'm not using the example to hopefully cause harm to anybody. But ultimately, there couldn't be a conversation where he wasn't the center of the conversation. And a lot of people are like this in the United States because of how we're raised with our value system. So we tend to interrupt. Now, when we interrupt during normal conversations, there's two different types of interruptions. One, there is a general interruption. We may interrupt to clarify for information. We may wish to add an example. How many of you have done this? Oh, yeah. No, no, no. This happened to me too. I was driving and this guy cut me off. How many of you have given an example like that in the middle of somebody else's story?
Yeah, I have done that before.
Same here.
And when we do this, we think we're helping. I'm sure you thought you were helping, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't want the person to feel alone. You don't want to make them feel like they're the only ones who ever has this experience, right? You want to know that you are on their side. You know what it feels like. I am there for you, right? So what we end up having with these types of interruptions are usually not terrible things, right? The other person doesn't normally feel horrible about it unless, of course, they're in a bad emotional space. But in general, it is a small emotional overwhelm when somebody interrupts you in a conversation. And if you do it right, the interruption then doesn't feel like it is a barrier. It may feel like even it's contributing to the moment of conversating. Then there's competitive interruptions. And we've got so much of that going on right now, especially in the arena of politics. Competitive interruptions. And this is when we're trying to debate, trying to make a point, we're trying to challenge the other person's point, and we find miscommunication with a higher emotional overwhelm potential under these circumstances. But Americans in general, and a lot of people in the West, I would say, we function in our conversations between these types of interrupting. Basic interrupting, in which we're trying to clarify, add an example, or maybe it's, environmental noise, for example, getting text messages during a conversation. And then there's competitive interruption where there's a win-lose kind of dichotomy that's happening. But To listen to understand is very, very different. And this is what I'm going to ask you to practice this week. And this is not an easy thing to practice because we're all raised with this idea that communication should come naturally, right? We learn it from our parents. We learn it from the entertainment we are exposed to. We learn it from our friends, right? And we feel like, oh, it should be easy, easy to do. But it's not, because our natural instincts combined with our cultural norms tend to dismiss our ability to listen well. So, my challenge to you this week is I really want you to listen to understand. Listen to understand, which means stopping yourself from any form of interruption until it is absolutely appropriate to do so. When we listen to understand, we listen to information. And, as Dubla Salam said, we also listen to the body language. We listen to the para language. We imagine, as Natalia discussed, imagine the best we can how that situation went with the other person. So we're activating our imagination center. We're activating our ability to have compassion. We're activating our ability to have empathy with the other person by just listening. And it's very difficult. You're going to find this to be very, very difficult. You need to try to avoid distractions. You need to try to avoid things like environmental distractions and also your own psychological noise. Why would psychological noise be a problem under general conversations, even conversations about, for example, what to have as an evening meal? Ajima, welcome, by the way. Do you have any examples? I hate to throw you on the spot, but I've been making your other three classmates talk a great deal. So do you have any examples?
No.
No? All right. Well, I want you to think very specifically as you have conversations this week, how you can remove, especially if the conversation isn't about you, if it's about somebody else, how can you remove the I in that moment? How can you make room for the other person? What are the different techniques you can use? Now, we're going to go over a few techniques that I'm going to encourage you to try to use this week. But in general, I think what you'll find that when you're dealing with emotional people, especially, having the capacity to deeply listen and to structure a conversation so that everybody knows what their roles are in that conversation will help the conversation go much smoother, and you'll be able to help heal the other person who may be in distress. Now, it's interesting to note that because individualism, we are often in a competitive conversational space or sphere when we are in collectivism, because we share a lot more meaning. In some ways, it is easier to deeply listen to another person. And we all have a little bit of collectivism in us. Okay. So if you are practicing the holidays right now, right, you're experiencing a lot of collectivism because there is the effort of putting the group's need above your individual needs. A matter of fact, the fasting reminds us that it's not just about us, it's about others, right? Does that make sense for anyone?
Yeah.
Yes.
So there is a practice built in with Ramadan and with many spiritual practices in general, and I don't care what religion you're in, where we practice putting ourselves down, our ego down, so that we can make room for others. And when we are in those environments, we are literally in a collectivist environment, which is interesting because a lot of Americans, we don't necessarily have that on a regular basis. We practice it in little areas, right? We practice it in our little families, core families. We practice it in our spiritual communities. We may practice it in our larger cultural communities as well. But as a nation, in general, we don't practice it. As a nation, we practice quite the opposite. So we're going to talk about some techniques. The first thing you need to do in most conversations, especially if it's not a casual conversation, if it's a casual conversation where everybody is just shooting the bull, so to speak, that's a phrase my dad used to use all the time, shooting the bull, I'm just shooting the bull, where you're talking about nothing terribly important. Maybe it's about a TV show you watched, maybe it's about a YouTube show you watched. Maybe it was about the meal you ate. Maybe it was about what you did during the day. These conversations, they don't need quite as much clarification because they're casual. But if you're dealing with somebody who is upset or there is a disagreement in any kind, the first thing you need to do is offer clarification. What is required of each of us in this conversation? So, for example, if I'm dealing with somebody who is highly emotional, right? They're highly emotional, they're upset, they had a bad day, something bad happened to them. The first thing I always say is, what do you need from me? Do you need me just to listen? Are you looking for advice? Do you want me to participate, or rather, do you just need me to sit here and just hear you? Now, this sounds very formulaic. Does it sound formulaic to anybody else? It does to me.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
But go ahead. Najima, I'm sorry.
It sounds very formal.
And it kind of is uncomfortable in that sense, right?
Yeah.
But what this does is an extremely important thing. It establishes what is expected from you from the other person, right? When we go back, if we go back to the second unit in this class where we did communication to self, one of the things we talked about was having our needs met. And that when our needs are not met or our perceived needs are not met, we often have a really difficult time, I think, being able to have conversations or relate to other people because we feel shafted. So by clarifying the roles of each individual, everybody knows what's expected of them. You don't have to guess. It takes the guessing game away, and that's vital. Now, we need to take this clarification with the understanding that our roles may change during the conversation. So, for example, I may have a bad day and I may be going, Natalia, I'm having a horrible, horrible day. This happened to me and that happened to me and that happened to me. No, I just want you to listen. I need you just to listen. And then towards the end of the conversation, I may look at you and I may go, so now I don't know what I want to do. At that moment, your role has changed. You're no longer the listener. A question has been asked. And that's a point in time where we re-clarify our roles. Oh, do you want to talk about it now? Do you want to think of different solutions? I can help as best as I can. And then you let the other person tell you what they need from you. This allows two things. One, everybody's roles are very clear. So there's less likely that an emotional situation is going to blow out of proportion. Okay. The next thing is that we're being flexible enough to meet the needs of the moment, because needs in conversations changes all the time. But you'll find that if you do this small little process, tiny, tiny little process, what could be a potential massive argument now has been minimized so that each person can have their needs met in that moment. Does this make sense to people, even though it feels very formulaic?
Yeah, I think it would make the
Makes sense.
conversation a lot easier.
It's, the hardest part about communication is not knowing what is being expected of you, or making the assumption, right? When we jump to the fundamental attribution error, making the assumption, right? And both of those things are kind of a problem. So what do you need me to do? So when we do this, anxiety goes down a lot, because if you're dealing with somebody who is really emotional, not knowing how they're going to react creates a lot of anxiety in ourselves and, of course, in the other person. It demonstrates compassion. It demonstrates, hey, I want to be here for you and your needs right now. So tell me what that is, right? And this even works in the middle of an argument, by the way. And I know it sounds weird, but if we do something like this in the middle of an argument, what we're doing is we're creating a mindfulness moment, right? We're being mindful of the moment of the conversation. And again, this decreases the possibility of a lot of miscommunication as a result of heightened emotions, right? The next thing is, instead of interrupting to offer an example, interrupt or find the perfect pause. It's not really an interruption, it's a pause, right? So sometimes in conversations, we hear this pause. And at that moment, it's a good time for you, if you're listening to the upset person, to clarify what they said. So in this case, somebody tell me something that was difficult that happened this week to you, last week to you. Nobody got in an argument? Nobody had a bad day?
No, not really. I feel like everything's been going well.
All right, so
Yeah.
let me see if I can give an example then. So let's say somebody was upset because they were cut off in traffic. That's always my go-to example. I don't know why. It's just such a common thing that happens all the time. And they're talking about their fear. And they say, and this guy cut me off. He didn't even see me. And then I had to swerve and I almost hit another car, blah, blah, blah. The other person's responsibility then at a pause is to go, okay, let me be clear about what you said just happened to you. You were driving home. On your way home, somebody in a very large vehicle cut you off. They didn't see you there. You were probably in their blind spot, but you had to swerve and you almost hit somebody else. Is that correct? And by just repeating what the other person said in our own words, you know how much I am about saying things in your own words, right? Definition in your own words. What we do is clarify what the other person is trying to communicate. And by clarifying, just going through each point, point A, point B, point C, point D, and giving it to the other person we're having a conversation with, that allows the other person to clarify our perceptions. Because our perceptions are always based on our own fields of experience. We are not the same as the other person. We may share a great deal. We may have lots and lots in common. We may love each other. We may have even grown up with each other. But our perspectives of an event is always through our own lenses, and therefore there's always a possibility of getting something wrong. So this allows the other person to be more specific about, yes, I did say that, but you missed the part about how my coffee fell down in my hand and went all over the car. By giving the other person a list of what they said, and then giving them an opportunity to clarify to make sure there is no miscommunication, we then are able to create more of a compassionate situation, right? We can hear each other more completely. And this is particularly important in emotional conversations. Can anybody tell me why they think it might be important in an emotional conversation to have this kind of approach?
Maybe because let's say I started off as the person who was listening in an emotional conversation, and by the end, my friend expects me to give advice. If I did not know specifically what she was talking about, or if there's certain points I missed, she could be upset or something could go wrong because she would think I'm not listening.
Right, absolutely. That's a great example. So your friend might look at you then and go, you don't understand me. You're not listening, right? So by showing you're listening in this particular formulistic way, by showing you're listening, what you're doing is you are really showing that you're trying to meet the other person's needs. And conversations is really about meeting each other's needs. Unfortunately, I am in a situation where I have to lecture. But if you'll notice, I stop and I ask other people to participate because I'm not the only one with an understanding in this room right now, right? We all have different perspectives, and all of those perspectives should be respected and actually presented to some degree. Now, does this mean you have to agree with the other person and their points of view? Let's say it was a political conversation.
Well, no, not in a political conversation. You wouldn't have to agree with the other parties. You would kind of just have to understand.
Right, right. And is that happening right now in our world?
Kind of.
It is? Please give me the good news. I want to hear it. How do you see it happening right now?
Well, let me see. Let me think about it.
Okay, think about it. Think about it a little bit. I'm seeing and it could be the negative bias. You have to always be aware that the negative bias is sitting in there and living with you and also structuring a lot of your thoughts and a lot of your beliefs. But what I'm seeing now is an inability for people to deeply listen to each other and listen to understand rather than listen to debate or listen to disagree or listen to win. What I'm seeing on more of a national platform is all of us becoming even more isolated from people who have different opinions, differing thoughts, different ways of looking at the world, different political beliefs, different spiritual beliefs, cultural beliefs. It's almost as if you can't understand me and I can't understand you because you're not part of my community. And what we're seeing right now, in my opinion, is what we call extreme individualism, where we are really suggesting that the individual and their communities each feel better than other communities around them. And we're seeing this in our political discourse. We see it from everything from like the arguments over masks to what's that culture? They call it the cancel culture, which we're seeing on social media, walking that fine line between free speech and dangerous speech, right? So we're not seeing a lot of people listening. We're seeing a lot of shouting, especially online. I see this a lot online. So when we listen, though, to understand, we're not listening to just agree. We're listening to just simply understand, to have more information about somebody else's point of view. And this works from everything from maybe your sibling borrowing one of your items without your permission and then you getting upset about it, to something massive happening on the political scale. And we're seeing it at all different levels right now, this inability to hear each other, to listen. And these few techniques that I've given you today will change your conversations forever. And so if you find yourself in a difficult conversation this week, no matter what it is, I want you to take the time to listen, to understand, and to just try these techniques out and to get back to me in an email about your experiences, because we don't really have a journal this week. So I'd like to hear if it worked for you and what worked for you and why. Very clearly, 2 steps. 1, clarify what your role is supposed to be and what the other person is asking you to do, and be flexible enough to change your role should you need to. And the second one, listen for information and do this by finding that perfect pause and repeating what the other person said to you, and then asking them in a very calm voice, is this what you're talking about? Do I got it correct? And then allow them to go on. If we do this in most of our, especially emotional conversations, you'll find you're able to take that emotionality down a great deal. You'll limit your psychological noise, which are your opinions, your biases, your assumptions, right? It'll limit the psychological noise and therefore limit the emotional noise, which will then help bring down any physiological noise you may have. When we're upset, our heartbeat goes, the stress hormones go, we might be crying, right? And then all of these things can actually then create compassion between two people. These two small structures, they're tiny, but they're huge. And if you can practice this in your everyday life, you'll find a lot easier conversations to have when things are difficult to talk about, so to speak. And I think that's really all. When somebody is seeking advice, again, clarify that. Do you just need me to be here? Do you just need me to hold you? Do you want me to hold your hand? Do you need me to listen? Do you need a piece of advice? Asking these kind of clarifying questions, and that's what we call them, clarifying questions in your conversation, enhances the listening process, but also demonstrates that you're there for the other person, that you care how they feel and how they think. And that is it. I just wanted to present these techniques because when we talk about deep listening, it's got to be a conscious, it can't be an unconscious reaction in a conversation. You literally have to be very conscious about directing the conversation into the right place for both parties or all parties. Any questions? No? Okay, so who's going to be on board to try to do this week and then email me your results?
I will try.
You will
Yeah, same
try.
here.
Yeah, you guys can do this. Go ahead, Natalia.
I'll try too.
All right. Najima?
I'll try also.
Yes, that's what I want to hear. Give it a shot. Let me know how it works, because if it works well for you, you'll have techniques you can use for the rest of your life. When you're talking to a boss, when you're talking to your partner, when you're talking to family members, when you meet some crazy person out in the street who wants to beat you up because you're wearing a mask, or whatever it is, right? Whatever that situation is, you can control the conversation through a simple questions. What do you need? And what do you need from me at this moment? And that's all I got for you this week. I do hope it's very helpful, and I look forward to having conferences with everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody have a blessed day, a wonderful week, and take care of yourself.
You
Aloha.
too.
You too.
You too.
Thank you.
You
Bye.
too.